Hey, this is Rob. This is episode 138 of the Folly Coffee Podcast. Let's get it brewing.
1, 2, 3, 4.
All right. If this episode sounds a little different, if you're watching the video, it obviously looks very different. That's because I'm recording from home today, because it's a cozy day. That's right. Did a little sauna and cold plunge session this morning, feeling refreshed, and said, you know what? It's been a few weeks since we've had a podcast episode go live, and I've got some thoughts on 2023 coffee industry predictions. We just passed 5 years at Folly Coffee in January. Things have been rapidly changing. A lot of that brought on by the fun of 2020 and 2021. But even in the past year, the past 18 months, I've seen some shifts in consumer demands, in the way that cafes and restaurants are looking at coffee, and so I'm going to do today's episode on coffee industry predictions. I'm going to basically do like an overview of the specialty coffee industry, some notable things from the NCA, the National Coffee Association 2022 report. Then I'm going to categorize it into cafes and restaurants, grocery and retail, online. Going to look at some miscellaneous coffee business models that I think could be effective. Look at home coffee drinking, which has dramatically changed over the past couple of years. Then just go over some other thoughts. And then at the very end, I'm going to finish it with trends that I wish would become bigger. And I'm specifically talking about the US. So first, the good news is specialty coffee continues to grow, which is awesome. This is something that when I moved back, quit my job in May of 2017 and moved back, I already saw that the specialty coffee category had been steadily growing over the past 10 years. The number of coffee drinkers remains pretty dang stable and actually grows a little bit, but the amount being spent on coffee had continued to increase. What this meant to me was that people are buying better coffee, and this trend continues to grow. According to the 2022 NCA report, specialty coffee increased to 62% of all cups consumed in the past day. This is rising from 56% in the previous year of 2021. Now, this is pretty significant because this means that the majority of coffee being consumed in the US is specialty coffee and has gone up 8% since the previous year. When you think of how big coffee is as a beverage, 8% growth is majorly significant and is a trend I always like to see. This increasing trend is driven by younger coffee drinkers from the ages of 25 to 39, and these people are drinking more espresso-based beverages like lattes or cappuccinos than ever before. Cold brew also continues to be a driver of specialty coffee, being the third most commonly prepared or preparation method of specialty coffee drinkers. And I'll get more on that later. But the first kind of channel I wanted to focus on and make some predictions in is cafes and restaurants. The biggest thing here over the past 5 years since I launched Folly, one of my predictions from the start was that there's going to continue to be increased competition from both sides. And what I mean by that is that larger, more established businesses are going to capitalize on the growth of this category and continue to push better coffee, and the emergence of brand new coffee roasters, which we have definitely seen an explosion of new roasters and selections of coffees over the past 5 years. With this increased competition, when it comes to cafes and restaurants, one of my major predictions is that non-coffee services will become a major deciding factor for cafes and restaurants when they're deciding to choose coffees. One thing I think us as roasters, we sometimes hesitate to admit is that there's a lot of great coffee out there. It is very difficult to say that you have the best coffee by far. No one even comes close. So it's an obvious choice for any cafe or restaurant to choose your coffee because it's superior to all other coffees. When in reality, if your coffee or if someone else's coffee is close to quality as another option that is available, all the non-coffee factors are going to become a major player in this. The obvious one is price. Now, when I talk about coffee buying behaviors, whether it's cafes and restaurants, retailers, direct consumer, I very rarely focus on price because in the high end of specialty coffee, if price is the number one deciding factor on how someone is choosing coffee, they're probably not going to be looking at high-end specialty coffee anyway. So when you're looking at cafes and restaurants, if you're talking to a potential customer and their first question is, what is your price? Before tasting the coffee, before asking about your practices, where you're sourcing from, any other of those types of things, it's probably not going to be a great fit because if price is their number one deciding factor, they're always going to go for a bigger company that is just driving costs down. And quite frankly, that's not what I'm about. That's not what Folly's about when it comes to price. We don't want to drive price down. Ironically, we would actually prefer to see prices go up because this means everyone in the supply chain is much more well taken care of. But when I'm talking about non-coffee factors, I'm talking about the following. Do you offer equipment? This was a major game changer for us at Folly. We started doing equipment with a distributor in late 2019. Then we shifted in 2021 to doing equipment directly ourselves. This is admittedly a high-risk endeavor that requires capital. But because of that, it separates you from a lot of, especially local competition when you're talking to cafes and restaurants, because offering equipment is a major value to cafes and restaurants, and quite frankly for many people is if you don't offer equipment, they won't even include you on the list of roasters or coffee that they might actually decide to use. Along with that, even if you don't offer equipment, there are other things that can still be almost a necessity to be able to sell in the cafe restaurant space. Do you offer labor and maintenance? So even if you are offering equipment or not offering equipment, do you offer labor or maintenance on that equipment? When you're thinking about a cafe or restaurant and how they're making their decisions, one thing that is a common theme is the more people and contacts that they have to reach out to take care of one thing like coffee, the more burdensome it becomes. And what you're trying to do as a coffee supplier is you're trying to take work off of the plate of your customers. You're trying to make their life easier. So if you don't offer equipment, or if you don't offer equipment and you don't offer labor and maintenance, now all of a sudden they've got a coffee contact. So you only do their coffee beans. Then they need another contact for their labor and maintenance. Then they need another contact for their equipment. If you can get as many of these things in-house, or at least have a preferred labor or maintenance person that you work with, shout out Tyler at Impossible Coffee, that's how we do it, it makes it a lot easier for the customer that they can have one contact point, one billing contact, that it makes it a lot smoother for them. As coffee continues to grow in the high end, you need to separate the reasons why a cafe or restaurant might want to choose your coffee. Now, obviously, taste is the number one thing. Make sure you're bringing samples of brewed coffee to any sales meeting, or that you're hosting people to a cupping or something where they have an opportunity to taste your coffee to determine for themselves that, yes, it is very obvious this is a superior product. This is a superior coffee to other old school, darker roasted, commodity grade coffees that, yes, the price is very attractive because of just, well, I don't want to say because of why, but let's just say if you dig into the pricing models of some of these roasters that are really driving pricing down, you're going to find a lot of stuff that you might not necessarily like. But outside of just the taste itself, you want to offer training and education on coffee and barista skills. So when I say education on the coffee, you need to be able to adequately tell the story of your coffee and of your brand that makes it different than other potential options on the table. And this is a difficult thing to do because it's one thing to be in person with a cafe or restaurant and be able to tell an owner or a manager the story of your coffee and why it's good. But what's the most important is that everybody in that organization knows this story. I compare it to if you were to go to a restaurant and ask for a bottle of wine. If you just ask like, hey, I would like a red wine. What do you recommend? And they're like, oh, this one's good. And you were to say, well, where's it from? Who makes it? What makes it good? And the server was just like, I don't know. You're probably not going to be too pumped about that wine. So I look at coffee the same way. That are you able to educate your customers in a way that everybody in that organization can at least know where it's roasted, who's roasting it, potentially which farms you're working with, so that they can tell the story that continues to separate, so that as that cafe or restaurant has to price that coffee higher because it's a premium product, the end coffee drinker knows why it's a higher price outside of just the taste. It's like creating layers to this thing where all of a sudden price becomes less important when it becomes more apparent why it is priced that way. And then the last thing, we don't do this at Folly, but this is definitely something I've identified as a potential opportunity for us as we're looking at like who our competition, what they beat us at. And it's things like allied products. So continuing on that theme of non-coffee products, do you offer allied products like syrups, filters, cups, all of these things that a restaurant would need to serve alongside coffee? If you can have all of these things available for purchase as well, that's another major advantage, because again, we're minimizing the number of contact points needed to be able to have a coffee program. So when you take all of these different factors, if you can have that complete package of really great coffee, because that is the foot in the door, you have to have absolutely stellar coffee to stand a chance. But it's all the non-coffee things after that that complete this total package that you're looking at when you're making a presentation to a potential customer. And that, in terms of 2023 predictions, is like the biggest thing. I think that it's going to be the demand from cafes and restaurants of what they're looking for from suppliers. However, on the other side, that is great news for a lot of awesome high-end specialty roasters that are producing amazing coffees, is the restaurant space. I think has dramatically changed over the past 4 or 5 years. If you're listening to this, Folly, we're in Minnesota, but one of the big things I noticed when I was traveling the country before launching Folly, I was doing a lot of research of what am I seeing in other coffee markets that I don't see in the Midwest? Which of these are potential trends that might continue to grow that could be either positive or negative news to potentially starting a coffee roasting business? One of the things I noticed in a big way on the West Coast is when you're going to a restaurant, I am seeing a lot of great coffees served at places that aren't traditional coffee shops, places that are just open for dinner but have coffee available on the menu. Usually, when you go out to dinner, especially like let's just say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if you're going to a restaurant, they're going to have coffee on the menu, but they're probably not listing which coffee it is, which roaster is making it, the origin, the name of the coffee. It's just going to be like standard coffee on the menu, which is fine. You have to have a coffee on the menus for someone to have a coffee after dinner, an espresso after dinner. But the thing I noticed on the West Coast that was a really positive sign to me that I'm seeing continue to be a growing trend is restaurants that are not coffee shops seeking out better coffees. Now, the reason this is a major opportunity is obvious. That you can now approach restaurants that may have never even considered which coffee they're serving and potentially be able to pitch them on the idea of like, you are focusing so much on your food menu to make sure everything on your menu is fantastic. And then potentially the last thing they're tasting before leaving your restaurant is a cup of shitty coffee. So they have this amazing experience from drinks, appetizers, main course, dessert. You know what? Let's get a cup of coffee before we finish our meal. And the last thing on their tongue that they taste is just whatever was the cheapest coffee so that we can have it available on the menu. I think this is a major opportunity to increase that experience of the restaurant and be able to like really round out that full thing with a really great cup of coffee at restaurants. So that is another prediction that's not a full-fledged prediction because this has been something that's already starting to grow, but I think it's going to shift that customers would prefer a great cup of coffee at restaurants and are going to start asking which coffee do you serve when they're making that decision of do we want a cup of coffee before we end this meal. So those are kind of the cafe and restaurant predictions I have for 2023. On to grocery and retailers. So grocery and retail since Folly launched was a major focus from the very beginning. When we launched in 2018, I just thought there wasn't a great selection of high-end coffee at retailers or grocery stores. Specifically, there was a very minimal selection of local roasters. You see, like I saw national brands like Intelligentsia, Stumptown on the shelves, and those are great coffees, but when you're thinking about how consumer behavior is dictating purchases, buying local has continued to become an increased focus of customers. So I looked at that as a huge opportunity and why I focused on grocery and retail starting in 2018. Now, this trend, again, has continued to grow, but my prediction for the next year or two is how the retailer or the grocery buyers are looking at this market. So when I first started selling to grocery stores, a lot of the time it was kind of an all or nothing mentality when it came to chains. So obviously, like if it is an independent location or a co-op, it's completely up to them which coffee they want to serve, and then you're selling to that one store. But when you start talking to chains of grocery stores with like 10 plus locations, 20 plus locations, 40 plus locations, it's usually an all or nothing kind of mentality of we're either serving your product at all of our stores or we're serving it at none of their stores. And the trend I think is going to happen in the next year or two is hyper localization within these retailers. So when I first started in 2018, that option wasn't even really pitched at all. I didn't really hear any buyer say, well, let's test it at 3 stores. Let's test it at 5 stores and see how it does. It was, let's try them all. We want to grow our local coffee selection. Now, what has happened over the past 5 years is that local selection of coffees has grown significantly. Now there's a lot of great, not only national high-end specialty coffees on the shelf, you're seeing an increased selection of locally roasted coffees. And already we're starting to see chains of local chains even. So I'm not talking like Target with like national distribution. I'm talking like in-state, like here locally, like Lunds and Byerly's, Kowalski's, these stores, and like every major metro market kind of has these, that they're going to start creating hyper localization. That if you've listened to this podcast, you probably know I used to sell beer for a living. Shout out Sam Adams. And this is a very similar trend to what happened in craft beer, is that when craft beer first started, it was like local is something that's made in the same region. Then as craft beer grew, it became local was made in the same state. Then it was like local is made in the same area code. Then it became like local is, it has to be in the zip code because there's just so many more options that are occurring. So I'm predicting that as an increased number of coffee offerings and roasters become available and new roasters start, or new roasters get to the point that they start selling to retailers, that retailers are going to become much more open to the idea of, hey, if you're not willing to place it in all 20 of your stores and all 30 of your stores, could we test it just in the stores closest to where we roast our coffee? And that's what I mean by hyper localization. And the reason I think that retailers are going to be willing to do this is because they're seeing the trends of what's happening in specialty coffee. One of the surprising things to me is that when we got on shelf, pretty quickly we were selling at the same rate or even higher than these established national brands. And the reason that surprises me is currently, outside of in-store promotions like sales that are pretty much an expectation, we're not really spending any money on additional marketing versus the larger competitors are investing a ton into these marketing dollars. And what this shows me is that local continues to be an incredibly important buying factor for customers. So even though we don't have the resources, the marketing, the brand awareness of all these national or regional brands, we're able to compete with them because we're local. So if I'm a retail buyer and I see these trends that, hey, these smaller, local, quality-focused brands are competing with and outselling national and regional brands, I want more of these. And then maybe the more local you get, the better those sales will be. So you can almost create like pockets of hyper localization within these retailers that could be a really effective selling strategy. So that is the tough thing about this is the larger the retailer is, the more difficult it becomes. You'll notice this is a consistent theme because this is something that's been consistent as I'm selling to larger retailers, and that idea of how many contact points you create. Larger retailers don't really want to create more contact points. So let's say there's a group of 50 stores of a national brand. Let's just use like Target, for example, here, because that's such a well-known national retailer. If they have a pocket of 50 stores, they might say, yes, we see hyper localization as a great strategy, but we can't add 10 groups of 5 stores with 10 new contact points, because when you bring that to scale, that's thousands and thousands of new contact points across the country. And the way to mitigate this as a potential local person that's trying to sell to just a small group of local stores is you're going to want to make sure you're working with a preferred distributor or broker of these retailers. So that's a great question to ask retailers as you're talking to them, is do you have a preferred distributor or broker that you work with? Because then that broker or distributor is already an existing contact of these retailers, and therefore you being sold in their store doesn't add another contact point. It just adds another product offering that could be a really great way for them to increase sales because of these trends that are happening with local. And in general, that's kind of how I like to talk to like retailers or buyers, is focus on the positive trends that I was just talking about within specialty coffee. Because while they might not know your business, if you're a small business like we are, most of the time when I approach somebody with Folly, they probably haven't heard of it. But when you can focus on what's happening in the entire category and then bring the focus back to your brand, that's a great way to potentially entice a buyer to want to bring that in. But with increasing competition, it's much easier said than done. With this in mind, another prediction I have is that packaging is going to become increasingly important. I think 10 years ago, with fewer options, with not as many high-end specialty coffee roasters, packaging wasn't necessarily the number one determining factor, or I don't think that packaging's ever the number one factor, but it might be that really important factor that at least gets somebody to take it off the shelf and take a look at it. So when I say packaging is important, if you are on a shelf at grocery or retail, does your packaging stand out from the competition? This may seem really obvious, but if you based your style or the font, the colors of your bag on existing trends within the category, probably means you don't stick out much on the shelf. And then when your coffee bags are placed next to each other, is there a billboarding effect? Is it really clear that these are different coffees but from the same brand, and when they're all placed together, it blocks out this nice billboarding effect on the shelf that's going to attract the eye of a potential customer? Because when you don't have brand recognition, this is incredibly important to at least pique the interest of somebody that might be open to purchasing a new coffee. The other side of packaging is how effectively are you able to tell the story of your brand with limited packaging space? It is very difficult, and much more difficult than it sounds, to only use the back panel of a coffee package to be able to briefly tell the story of your brand in a way that is going to entice new customers. So when you're thinking about packaging, I think that's going to become an increasingly important thing for buyers, is that they're looking at that. If it looks similar to a product that they currently carry, they're probably not going to pick it up unless you have some crazy differentiation or some sales numbers to come in and like say this packaging's not even important, look at these numbers. But if you're just getting started or you're still trying to establish the brand, probably is not going to be the case. Now, I don't know if this is quite a hot take or not, but with how established nationally that specialty coffee has become, with some of these major players I mentioned before, like Intelligentsia, like Stumptown, Counterculture I'm seeing pop up, even in this market, despite being a West Coast brand, is that product innovation and package size, I think, are going to be two things that are going to be the only way to really effectively grow on a regional or potentially national scale. I don't think that there is going to be a new coffee roaster selling whole beans and whole beans only that's going to become a national brand. I think the brands that are going to become regional and national players that are newer coffee roasters or coffee brands are going to be the ones that have a variety of product offerings that other roasters don't have. Already, we're starting to see the trend of, let's say, like K-Cups, which I know we all, no, K-Cups. But when you look at the numbers, and I'm going to be talking about home coffee drinking later, when you look at the number of coffee drinkers that this is their preferred method, as a retailer, you're saying, well, that category is a huge category for us. So if we can find a better version of that, then we're open to it. And when I say like packaging size, you've got different retailers I already have a bunch of 12-ounce offerings of this coffee. Could you potentially offer a 4-ounce sampler? And that's not the best example, but that could be a way to increase kind of that impulsive purchase that, hey, this 12-ounce bag is anywhere from $16 to $19. Could we do a 4-ounce bag that someone could get for like $5? And that might be, it's a lower sale price per point, but it's only $5. So maybe it's a great way to get somebody to try the product. So maybe the end goal, and at this point, I'm kind of just rambling on like the idea I just came up with the top of my head. But if you came to a retailer and said, hey, we offer both 4-ounce and 12-ounce bags, the goal of the 4-ounce bag is to drive that impulse purchase so that new customers will try our coffee and then later move on to the 12-ounce, because we believe that when they taste that 4-ounce coffee, it's going to make them want to buy that 12-ounce when they see the difference in quality. So you might be targeting someone that's never had high-end coffee and do it at a price point for a smaller package that could be that. Or you go the opposite way, kind of the big bulk ordering size. Like, can we do a 2-pound bag that is going to be a much better value per ounce for those customers that like high-end coffee, but also are looking for a value, so that your margin would probably be smaller on something like a 2-pound bag, but your profit per bag is going to be higher. So when I talk about innovation, these are very like simple off the top of the head examples, but truly differentiated products from other roasters with similar styles of coffee is going to be a trend that I think will be the only way that newer roasters are going to be able to grow on a potentially regional or national scale, or even just a statewide scale. The competition is getting so much more, like so much increased competition with the number of selections that are available. Now, speaking of competition, the next category is online. Now, the old pandy, the old COVID, dramatically changed online purchasing. And this comes into play when I talk about at-home coffee drinking later. Increased competition is obviously a consistent theme in this episode because of just the number of options that are available. And there is no sales channel where this is more true than online. Obviously, because online you can be anywhere in the country and order any coffee and it can be shipped directly to you. So no longer are you just competing on a local scale. No longer are you just competing with the immediate coffees available in your area or the coffees available on the shelf. You are competing with every single roaster in the country. So you can imagine the reason why this is the most competitive channel. Now, this is not so much a prediction as just a fact as to what is happening right now. Return on ad spend, otherwise known as ROAS, R-O-A-S, not R-O-A-S, return on ad spend is getting horrific. Now, there's a few reasons for this, in my opinion. I think the first one is the growing number of competitors. There's more coffee roasters appearing every day, and online is the easiest place to launch. So you're seeing more and more roasters come into the market and start to spend money on ads to attract people to drink their coffee. The other side is that editing tools and software make creating ads cheaper and easier than ever before. So the quality of content about coffee is increasing because that barrier of entry, you used to need to have a DSLR camera, a great microphone, all of these tools to be able to just record the content. And then you need professional editing tools and everything to be able to make an effective advertisement. Whereas now, phone cameras are good enough. Phone editing software is good enough. Video editing, is that you can create great content on your phone, which makes it an even lower barrier to entry to be able to create effective ads, which again increases the competition of acquiring new customers. Now, how do you combat this? And this is where the prediction side comes in, is that this ROAS is decreasing. You have to spend more money to attract that customer than ever before. What I think is going to happen in coffee is that providing resources to potential customers is going to increase in importance. When you're thinking about a potential ad for a coffee or a potential video advertisement that is going to attract a customer at least to come to your website, it is very, very difficult to make a video just about your coffee that is going to be different enough that it's going to attract a new customer. And this is what I mean. We've all been on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube and seen the ad that has pretty much this exact script. We source the finest beans from around the world with ethical practices, fair trade, transparency, and we work with the best farmers and importers from around the world, and we roast it expertly or intentionally to create the best coffee profile so that our coffee is the absolute best that you're ever going to drink. Well, if every single advertisement sounds like this, it gets lost in the mix because it's no different than any other coffee you might find. My prediction is that providing free resources to potential customers is going to increase in importance. This goes back and reflects one of my predictions in the cafe restaurant side, is that education is going to be increasingly important. So I think people that are going to succeed more so than other roasters online are those that are creating videos and content that are educating customers. And this does two things. One, it provides a free resource for a potential customer that is interested in learning about coffee. Even if it's a paid ad, they're now seeing something and have learned something about coffee that they didn't know before. Now, the area you choose to focus on, that's up to you and your focus as a roaster, but you want to find things that customers might not necessarily know. And then what this does on the flip side is it also shows your credibility as a roaster. Now, this is where a prediction is not even just specific to coffee, but a prediction, I think, for overall branding. And so I'm going to take an exit here and say I'm no longer just in the online category, but for branding and marketing in general. I think you're seeing this smiley face shaped curve of a trend in terms of the focus of a brand. I think 10 years ago, the focus on the brand was like the feel of the brand, the lifestyle of the brand. What type of person would be drinking your coffee? What does it feel like? What imagery are you using? The overall feel. Then I think 5 years ago, the trend shifted dramatically to being very, very, very focused on just the product itself. So when we're talking about coffee, the trend went to, we're literally just telling you the processing method, the origin, and the farm. And that's all we're telling you about this coffee. I think this is going to shift back to that feel, that lifestyle branding, to give an idea of, am I the type of person that would buy this coffee? I think Liquid Death is probably the best example of this. They're selling water. So how did they attract any new customers when a very small portion of their marketing or brand or story is that this is great water? It's almost like an assumption that they go, this is amazing water, but they did a full focus on the packaging. It just looks badass and cool. All their commercials are fun and edgy and interesting, where you're like, I'd like to think that I'm the type of person that would drink this water because it looks like cool, fun, exciting people drink this. And I know when you say it like that, it sounds very oversimplified, or almost like you think it's you don't, how do I put this? I'll just say it, that you think your customers are stupid and that they're going to fall for this thing of oh, you'll be cool if you drink this. But really what it is you're just trying to show them this is the type of people that enjoy our product. So when you're thinking of coffee, as opposed to just saying, this is a naturally processed Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, focus more on what type of person or what type of coffee drinker would enjoy a naturally processed Ethiopian Yirgacheffe. Because unless somebody already knows what that is, it's going to be a more compelling marketing and branding story to focus on who would even want to drink this type of coffee in the first place. So now I'm going to get back into the online channel, but that is a trend that I definitely think is going to continue to grow, is the brands that are going to succeed more so than other brands in the online space are ones that are going to be able to like really give a feel for who they think loves their coffee or who they know loves drinking their coffee based on their time in business. But on the online side, this is a combination prediction, but also just what I've seen to be really effective is that as the social media landscape becomes more and more flooded, as algorithms continue to change, as return on ad spend continues to decrease, that direct marketing is going to be the most important. For us right now, email marketing is something that people who sign up for your email newsletter are people that are directly interested in hearing from you. So the engagement you get with those emails, the click-through rate you get on these are going to be exponentially higher than social media. Social media is very alluring, especially with like the advent of TikTok and Reels and YouTube Shorts, is that like it's like really sexy to be like, I could post a video that could go mega viral and it could totally change everything about the business. And this is very true. So I'm not saying don't do these things, because you could literally have one video go mega viral and change the entire scope of your business. But when you're thinking about a long-term sustainable strategy that you can kind of grow brick by brick and like start to build that mountain one grain of sand at a time, email marketing is an incredibly effective way because it is direct to the customer and it's people that want to receive, they want to be receiving these communications from you. The other side of this is how do you get directly to a customer is SEO, search engine optimization. So when you're thinking about Google, obviously being the dominant one in this, but also I'm going to bring up Amazon in a bit. But on the Google side is, are you showing up for search terms that people are looking for? SEO could be a whole other episode, because it is an absolute rabbit hole in terms of like how do you show up on page one for certain search terms. And the reason I say page one is because if you're on the second page of a search term, not many people are going to page two to try to find what they're looking for. But SEO is a very effective way to directly find customers that are looking for terms that are relevant to your business. But also, again, with increased competition, it's getting harder and harder to be on that page one for things. So that is some of the predictions, but also a lot of just like what I see happening in the online channel of coffee business. On to what I just labeled miscellaneous coffee business models. There's a huge opportunity for people as this category grows to capitalize in these miscellaneous business models. The major one that I'm seeing be really effective and I think is going to continue to grow and could be a potentially great addition to your coffee business or be the core main focus of your coffee business is coffee carts, or the ability to be able to serve pop-up coffee. Now, any coffee roaster has the ability to do pop-up coffee. We can brew the coffee with a Chemex, put it into some dispensers, and do pour-over coffee. But you'll see later how small pour-over actually is when it comes to, like, black coffee actually is when it comes to coffee consumption. But the ability to do espresso and espresso drinks is incredibly important. This is what most people, when they're looking for a coffee cart for their event, they're looking for the ability to do lattes and cappuccinos. So if you can do this with a coffee pop-up or a coffee cart, it is potentially a very effective addition to your coffee business or core focus to start, that you're looking at like corporate events, farmers markets, weddings, birthday parties, any sort of gathering, festivals. As the popularity of not only specialty coffee grows, but also there's another trend of non-alcoholic beverages in general growing in popularity, that this is starting to become a demand that is continued to increase, that I'm seeing new coffee cart businesses pop up and be able to book out every single weekend. And then you're selling that end latte, cappuccino, brewed coffee to the end customer, and you're bringing in all of that revenue versus just selling the beans. Then the other side is, I always love the story of the California gold rush, that it wasn't the people that went out into the California gold rush that made the most money generally. Yes, you heard the success stories of someone struck gold and now they're crazy rich and look at them now. But a lot of the people who made great money were the people that were selling coffee mining, or not coffee mining, gold mining equipment. So it's actually the people that were selling the products adjacent to gold mining that probably had the best businesses overall. It might not be as high reward as potentially striking gold, but it is much more dependable, and they're capitalizing on increased demand of a category, in this case, gold mining. So when I look at specialty coffee, I go, the obvious thing is coffee roasting, or opening a cafe. Hey, specialty coffee is growing. Let's sell coffee. What the challenge would be, I put to you or someone interested in starting a coffee business or wants to be in this industry, and what I think will continue to be of increasing value over the next 2 to 5 years, are things that support the coffee industry. So obviously, if you're using the gold mining analogy there, could you create a coffee product that is helpful to roasters, to cafes, but this could be something that needs a lot of resources. One category I think is going to continue to be of increasing value is that coffee education piece. And you could look at this a few different ways. If you are a skilled barista, could you become a certified barista trainer and be able to train cafes and train baristas and train coffee roasters on serving their coffee in the best way possible? Could you directly host coffee classes? We're literally doing one like a couple weeks from now. I've had enough people reach out that we used to do tours that were really popular, and enough people reached out that like, hey, we'd love to do the tour. We don't offer it anymore. So I was like, but we need to start doing classes because people want to taste coffee. They want to learn about it. They want to know more about this thing that they love. So I think that there is a business model in education that is going to be of increasing value, that individuals with the expertise to do so could either go directly to the end customer, the end coffee drinker, or go to that cafes, the ones serving it, and that there's going to be an increased demand for these services that I don't think many people think of when they're thinking about starting a coffee business. They generally go towards literally what I did is, well, I'll start a coffee business. And as you look back at that, you go, obviously I'm glad I did it, but as you're looking 5 years later, the competition is increased. And as a coffee roaster, we now have the shop in Linden Hills in Minneapolis. That is something that I go, education is incredibly important. And if someone came along with this type of service, that could definitely be of value. Now, on to at-home coffee drinking, which is going to be kind of the last category in terms of trends. And then I'm going to go on to some miscellaneous thoughts. And then I'm going to finish the episode with trends I wish would become bigger in the US. You could almost call these pet peeves of what I wish more people did in the coffee drinking space. So, last category, at-home coffee drinking. According to the 2022 NCA, the National Coffee Association report, 77% of past day specialty coffee drinkers have had at least one coffee prepared at home. This was up 5% from the previous year in 2021. Now, this is incredibly important for two reasons. One, 77% is a significant number. Basically, if someone's a specialty coffee drinker, 3 out of 4 people have had a coffee that they made themselves at home in the past day. The other significant thing here is that is up 5% from 2021. The reason that's important is obviously at-home coffee consumption skyrocketed in 2020 because everyone was locked down at home. This trend has not diminished. It's actually gone up since this time, which is crazy to think about. What that tells me is that as people started making more coffee at home in 2020 out of necessity, I think more people have become comfortable with brewing coffee at home, and it's even become a part of their daily habits. This type of thing allows the coffee drinker to save money while continuing to have a great coffee experience. You can buy high-end specialty coffee beans in a 12-ounce bag and you have a much better cup of coffee at home and still save money than if you were to get a cup of coffee or a latte or cappuccino at a cafe. Now, these numbers surprised me a bit and actually kind of shifted my focus when making predictions. Drip coffee maker is still the number one method of brewing coffee at home at 32%. So a third of specialty coffee drinkers are using a drip coffee maker to make their coffee at home. However, this is down 7% from 2019. The second highest used coffee brewer at home is a single cup coffee brewer at 25%. And this number has remained pretty dang stable. Now, single cup, I know how we all feel about it. Most K-cups, it's under extracted. You get a watery cup. There's a lot of other things about K-cups that people don't like from the environmental standpoint. There's a lot of things about K-cups that as roasters we go, it's not the best way to brew coffee. But if you are not even thinking about this space, thinking about the single cup brewer population, you are eliminating 25% of specialty coffee drinkers as a potential customer at all. The one that really surprised me is the third most used at-home coffee brewing method is cold brewing. 20% of specialty coffee drinkers in the past day used cold brewing at home to make their coffee. And this is up 5% from 2019. So drip coffee makers are down 7% since 2019. Single cup brewers remain stable. Cold brewing has gone up 5%. Two other things to look at here. Espresso machines come in at the number 5 method at 12%. That was much higher than I expected. Pour over coffee comes in at just 2%. 2% of specialty coffee drinkers are using pour over method to brew coffee at home. Now compare this to how much marketing, social media posts, the focus of specialty coffee roasters on pour over. Now obviously, I don't even think this is my opinion. I think this is almost fact. I think pour over is just the absolute best way to make a single cup of brewed coffee at home. But when you're talking about only 2% of the population, if you are focusing as a specialty roaster or someone selling coffee, if you're focusing on pour over, you are missing out on 98% of people making coffee at home. 98% of specialty coffee drinkers. This is crazy. So what this lends to my prediction is in the next 2 to 5 years, specialty roasters are going to realize that pour over coffee, even though it's our preferred method of making coffee at home, this is not going to be our focus of attracting new customers. We are going to focus on drip coffee, on single cup, and on espresso and cold brew. If you take that, you combine the percentages of drip coffee maker, of single cup, and espresso machine, you are marketing and branding towards the majority of specialty coffee drinkers. If you are marketing towards pour over coffee, you are ignoring 98% of coffee drinkers making coffee at home. Let that sink in for a second. And when I say that, I'm speaking to myself because as I'm recording this and doing this research and making predictions, I'm like, I need to drastically change how I think about the educational material we're putting out, the videos, the educational videos we're putting out, the types of brewers we're focusing on to create the best at-home experience for the most potential customers. That one hit home heavy. Now, on to miscellaneous thoughts here. I don't think the window is closed on new coffee roasters. Obviously, there's increased competition, but the category continues to grow in popularity. Now, what I do think is starting to close is, like I mentioned earlier, the ability to grow in all channels in every way. So in general, from a business strategy perspective, when you're thinking about how do I beat larger competitors, I think hyper focusing on one specific sales channel could be a very effective way for new coffee roasters to beat their competition. Here's what I mean by that. If I were to start a coffee roaster today and keep the same business model that we created 5 years ago of grocery retail and online and cafe restaurant and pretty much going in every single channel, it would be very difficult to restart in 2023. But if I were to go back and create an online only focus and focus all of my energy and attention to creating the best content, to cultivating a massive email list, to doing things focused around growing that email list, to having the best possible website and online offering, to having the best shipping, just everything hyper focused on one channel, you would much more quickly have a better product online versus other roasters. You could apply this to really any sales channel. Could you start a roaster and say, we are the cafe and restaurant specialists, and focus all of your energy to going back to those predictions I was talking about earlier in the episode, creating the best overall package for a cafe and restaurant, and going to customers and saying, this is all we do. This is what we focus on. Therefore, you can know that all of our energy and time is going to be focused on creating the best cafe experience product offering possible. You could do this for grocery and retail. And then the biggest thing about this is not just like the product itself, but it's also dictates how you spend all of your time. Now, being in multiple channels, I basically spend all of my time, like 6-7 days a week, focusing on all these things all at once. And there's always something that needs to be done. And there's always more to learn, which is true about life in general. But if you were hyper focused on one channel specifically with a small team and you're just starting a new roaster and you may not necessarily have the resources or capabilities to outsource things to be able to create growth in these sales channels and be able to put together a team to be able to accomplish the goals you want, hyper focus can be a way that you can more quickly be highly competitive in these sales channels when compared to larger or more established businesses. And then the last thing on this is that focus really could be the cafe side. And one thing that leads me to believe that you might need to focus, if you're opening a cafe, have it be your primary singular focus, is because, once again, of something I saw in the craft beer industry. As the competition in the craft beer industry continued to grow, distribution became more and more difficult. So selling your 6-packs, selling your 4-packs, it used to be you go to the liquor store and there might be one door of craft beer available. Then all of a sudden it's 10 doors of craft beer that are available. So as that happened, new breweries popped up, maybe get a couple 6-packs offered at this retailer, but the pull through, the sales rate is not high enough because there's so many offerings. And what a lot of craft breweries found is that their tap room was actually the most profitable part of their whole business. And many breweries actually consolidated down and said, you know what? We're not even going to sell distribution anymore. We're going to sell 6-packs out of our brewery, growler fills, and we're really going to focus on creating the best taproom experience. I think this relates to coffee in a big way, is that if you're hyper-focusing, if you have a cafe, it takes a lot of time and effort to create a great cafe experience, and being able to consistently rotate your menu and always make sure that everything is absolutely on point. I think this is going to reflect in the coffee industry that if you have cafes, that they need to be the primary focus of that business. And I'm talking like if you are a newer business. As you start to grow, as you are able to bring in more revenue, then you can start to expand. But I think hyper focusing when you're first started or in your early years could be a really effective strategy for new businesses starting in the next couple of years. So, those are kind of my observations, my potential predictions for what we're going to see in like the next 2 to 5 years or here in 2023. Now, for the trends I wish would become bigger. The reason I created this into a separate category is because I don't think these trends are going to become a lot bigger, but I just had a couple things. First, I wish the pour over numbers were bigger. I think it's pretty clear that from those numbers that 98% of people are not using pour over coffee to brew their coffee at home. I think the reason this is a surprising number is because most of the coffee people I interact with are hardcore coffee nerds like myself. They do pour over. So in my mind, I'm like, yeah, if you're drinking great coffee, you're probably doing pour over because it's the best way to do it. I wish a trend that would become more prevalent was not focusing so much on convenience. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but it seems like in America that convenience continues to reign supreme. That if it's not convenient, I am not changing my current habit. A drip coffee maker, incredibly convenient. Touch of a button. K-cup, incredibly convenient. Touch of a button. It's the preparation and execution of brewing. It needs to be convenient for Americans to want to do it. I wish this trend would start to dissipate and that things like pour over or French press would become more popular. The second, and this one's kind of a random one, and the reason I didn't put this so much in predictions is because this is somewhat prevalent in like the Pacific Northwest, but I wish drive-through specialty coffee shops would become more popular. It seems like the only places that have drive-throughs are Starbucks and other national chains. And it pains me as I'm driving anywhere in the morning and I see a line of 20 cars at a Starbucks that I truly believe, if given the option, that customers would choose a better coffee shop if they had a drive-through. This goes back into wishing convenience was not such a major determining factor for Americans. But clearly it is. That I wish specialty coffee roasters, when opening cafes, would find locations or maybe create drive-through exclusive places to capitalize on this trend. Because when I see 20 cars in the drive-through line to get a cup of coffee and the inside of the shop is empty, that means that this person knows I'm 10 cars deep, but I would rather not park, walk in, order, walk out and leave. I would rather wait an extra 10 minutes to be able to get my cup of coffee because I don't want to leave my car. And the final thing, I wish straight up espresso drinking culture was bigger in the US. I don't know if there's a right and a wrong way to drink coffee, but Americans, we are drinking coffee the wrong way because espresso is the ultimate expression of coffee. When you think of how much it takes to get a very well executed shot of espresso and to not take them up on that opportunity is just wrong. The coffee has to be roasted expertly to be able to get a great profile for a balanced, complex shot of espresso. These coffee beans now need to show up at the shop. From here, the dial-in begins. Dialing in espresso is such a valuable skill that when you find a barista with this beautiful skill, it is a wonderful thing. The grind size needs to be just so. The espresso machine plays a huge part. The amount of water that is going through, the pressure distribution, the tamping, there's so many aspects to espresso to create the perfect shot of espresso. And then Americans are like, let's pour some milk in it. And let's pour milk in all of them. And I love a good latte or cappuccino. I really do. But to have that shot of espresso on its own, this highly concentrated version of a coffee that is going to expose every magnificent tasting note and aromatic present in that coffee, and to then put it in steamed milk, which is going to dampen that flavor and potentially mask some of those flavors, which, hot take, the reason I think lattes and cappuccinos are so big in the US versus like straight up espresso in other countries is because, have you ever had a shot of Starbucks on its own? They aren't really driving you to want to try that on its own, and that ability of steamed milk to mask those flavors is something that they might want, because bitterness is balanced by sweetness. Steamed milk does have sweetness to it, and so it is a nice balancer of a bitter shot of espresso. But if you have a great shot of espresso, I would recommend maybe you don't start with straight up espresso, but go down to the cappuccino size, then go down to the cortado size. Try a traditional macchiato with just a dollop of milk foam on that espresso. And then when you get to that point where you're truly appreciating espresso, it is a beautiful place to be. And that is how I will end this episode, as I do every other episode, and say have a nice day.